my dear friends, colleagues, and retina doctors all over the world. I'd like to welcome you all today in our new socio-scientific activity around the retina world in 30 days. This activity was hosted by the Egyptian Retina Society and will be broadcasted in 30 daily episodes during the holy month of Ramadan. So this year's program is very different. We're going to interview the well-renowned medical and surgical retina stars from different countries. We are aiming to explore some hidden aspects of the personal life, their social life, their career, and their dreams. And of course, they will give us some of the pillars in a very specific topic in the medical or surgical retina of the choice. Learning from our guests and from the hardships they face in life is our aiming to highlight how the pathway for success is not always a very easy or a paved road for success. Today, we are going to stop in a very specific and a unique country, which is known as the cradle of the Western civilization. Its very rich and unique legacy, a historical legacy, has always impacted its culture. Today, we're having Dr. Stratos Gotzaridis from Greece. Dr. Gotzaridis is an ophthalmic surgeon, a vitreoretinal consultant, and is the head of the MyRetina Athens Eye Center. He has received his his research fellowship at Harvard Medical School and his vitreoretinal fellowship at the Moorfields Eye Hospital in London. So welcome, Dr. Gotzaridis. We're very happy and glad to have you with us tonight.
It's a great honor for me to be with you and a great pleasure also. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, thank you so much. We're so excited to start our meeting now, and let's go first by exploring some of the milestones and some hidden stories that may be in the background of the success story of any of a great surgeon like yourself. So please, we want to know about the start of your medical profession. How did it start? When did you realize that you want to join the medical profession? What were your aims and goals? How did you work hard for that? And what are the hardships that you faced? Please tell us about your early college and school days.
Well, I brought up in a very small city up in northern part of Greece, and nobody from my family was a doctor. So become a doctor was a big challenge for me. And my father, I remember, he used to say, "Look, I'm not a doctor, I cannot support you. You have to go ahead alone." And I said, "Okay, Daddy, I'm going to go alone." So I started studying and I entered to the medical school, not completely sure that I'm going to like this specialty. But at the third and fourth year, when I entered to the clinics and started to face patients, I realized that to be a doctor, it's a great profession. I started to like the interaction with the patients. And there is where I realized that at least I'm not going to be a radiologist or microbiologist being closed in a laboratory. So at the end of my medical school, I realized that I'm going to have a surgical specialty, but I didn't know which exactly. And after I finished my medical school, we have an army service for 2 years. So I went to the army and served the Greek army for 2 years. And there we had some accidents during the course of my duty, and started to treat the soldiers who had accidents, started to have sutures, and then I said, okay, that's good, but let's go to more refined, to more better, to more modern, to have technology. And that is how I realized that I'm going to be an ophthalmologist.
Okay, so you started taking the sutures actually in these casualty cases before choosing the ophthalmology or as your specialty after that. You were put in the situation that you have to work and do the things that you were not used to, then you started to like this profession, right?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so tell us about your training. Where did you have your training? And how did the fellowship program really reshape your pathway?
I did my 4 years basic training here in Greece, and then realized that cataract, it's an easy operation. I need to do something more difficult like retina. And in Greece, we don't have established fellowships in retina. So I had to go to England and to start to work there and try to find a way to get a fellowship. When I went to England, 1997, I was the absolute outsider. Coming from a country where the training is not that well as it is in UK, I had to compete with my British colleagues to find a fellowship. So what I did, I was working 7 hours, 24/7 for 2 years in order to improve my knowledge and to improve my skills and to get a better, to get known myself to the family of the ophthalmology. And that is how I started to apply for fellowships. I did my fellowship, finally I found a fellowship down in Southampton and started to do VR there with 2 consultants, which was a great opportunity for me. 1 fellow for 2 consultants. I had 4 lists during the week. And after I finished that fellowship, I had the great honor to get to Moorfields to do my 2nd year in VR fellowship, being the first Greek who got a funded VR fellowship in Moorfields back in 1999-2000. And that fellowship in Moorfields, next to Sden Gregor, gave me the opportunity to do my final research fellowship in Boston with Donald D'Amico and Evan Gragoudas.
Yes, your basic retinal training was in London, right?
In London, exactly.
Can you tell us how many cases did you use to operate upon each week? For example, how many cases have you operated on average?
At that time, I used to do 10 cases per week. But it was in the first year in Southampton, we used to operate under local anesthetic, retrobulbar. Yes. In Moorfields, because it was a teaching hospital, a teaching for everybody, for the fellows, for the registrars, for the nurses, we used to operate under general anesthetic. So it took us longer time to operate. And at that time, we used to operate with 20 gauge. So you remember, open conjunctiva, open sclera, go in, then you go out, you have to suture the sclera, suture the conjunctiva, very long lists, very long cases. And also, half of the cases at that time was buckling. When I finished my 2 years training, I had in my hands 300 vitrectomies and 300 buckles, which is enormous number at that time.
That's a big number, yes.
Buckles now, I don't know if VR fellows do any buckles at all, no. At least 10 or 20. It's no buckles in the market now. No buckles
in the market, yes. So actually, during the pathway for any retina surgeon at the beginning, he might face some obstacles, he might face some hard, difficult situations that will make him stop, oh, I don't want to complete in this career. So did you face that during your fellowship? Did you face any difficult situation in which you were hesitant about continuing in this field or not? Because we know that's a very long pathway. Yeah.
Yes, actually, I've been very lucky. I had great teachers, and I have, which were very supportive, and they gave me step-by-step cases where they became gradually more difficult and more difficult. And it was like a TV game. Once you win one piece, you go to the next one. And always it was challenging for me that I was dealing with these difficult cases. And when I finished my fellowship, actually, it was a great honor for me, for Sden Gregor. I don't know if you know about this name.
Yes.
He told me that I had fellows for the last 15 years, but you were one of the best. And if you want to stay in UK, you can stay. I can find a place for you. But I wanted to come back to Greece to start here. So I didn't have anything to stop me or to make me change my mind in order not to do VR, to do something else. On the other hand, I had everything to convince me that I had to go ahead and do VR because this is what I like and this is what I learned to do well.
And probably because you were the first one to return back to Greece with a fellowship in the VR. At that time, you told me that you were one of the very first
I was the first
surgeons.
Yes. The first Greek VR fellow in Moorfields. All
right. So you probably so you don't remember any every surgeon has passed with a day at the OR, which is his longest day in the OR or the surgical nightmare. Did you have any surgical nightmares in your career?
Of course. I remember two cases. Yeah. Two difficult cases. The very first one, it was a 24-year-old lady, one eye, single eye, Indian in origin, immigrant in Greece, and she had a retinal detachment. The other eye had operations outside of Greece, on the way to Greece, somewhere in Syria and Turkey, and the other eye was lost. So that was a single eye. And he came to me at the end of December, just after Christmas, before the New Year. So I decided to do a buckle in the beginning. That was back to 2003, 2004. And I did a buckle, easy going, straightforward. And the lady next day developed anterior sigmoid ischemia, lost the eye, blind. So that was big disappointment.
That was immediately after surgery. So you didn't have any time to readjust the buckle or anything?
That happened after the surgery. Probably the buckle was one of the causes. Mm-hmm. Although it wasn't very tight, although I was very experienced to put buckles, but the eye was so sensitive and the ciliary arteries were very sensitive that the encirclement blocked them, so she developed anterior sigmoid ischemia, and the eye was blind. So that was really sad, and that is something that it's the worst thing in my career that I remember. 3 years later, I had a 4-year-old boy enter into my office with Stickler syndrome, one eye totally lost for multiple retinal detachments, and the other eye just developed retinal detachment. He came with his mother and father into my office, totally blind, just perception of light. It was Wednesday, the day was Wednesday, and they told me that we have an appointment with Karl Kleiss on Tuesday. We're planning to go on Tuesday to Karl Kleiss. I said, he's a great surgeon. He's going to see you, he's going to treat you. But he's going to see you on Tuesday, he's going to operate you the earliest on Wednesday. That means a week from today. I can operate you tomorrow. It was a big decision for me because, you know, if things went wrong, this boy would always say, Godzaridis blind me. Mm-hmm. But if things go right, he will always remember, because a week later, I know that Karl Kleiss is a very dear friend, a very good friend of me, and he is a great surgeon. But I know that this week, it was a very critical time. In this week, he might develop that severe PVR that Karl Kleiss, even if he places the retina in place, attached, the vision wasn't be that great as if he had a successful operation next day. So the boy decided and the parents decided to have a go next day. I remember that the whole night before the operation, I didn't sleep. I was thinking and I was making the steps of the operation, how I'm going to operate next day. Finally went very well. I did a vitrectomy. I did an encirclement because I always believe that Stickler needs an encirclement. Laser is not enough. And gas. And now this boy has 0.7 vision.
Great.
He is a student now. He always say, I haven't seen him for the last 5 years. That means he feels good and he feels nice. And he always say that Stratos saved my vision. And I'm really proud of
that
this.
was, yeah, so that probably was 3 weeks after the first case. It really made it up to you. I mean, you felt better at least.
Yes, yes. One case that paid me back for
so let's move. Yeah, paid back. So let's move away from the career a little bit, and let me ask you about how do you spend your spare time? Do you really have any spare time to spend in any hobbies, or
well,
do you like reading, sports, music?
I like reading when I have time, and now we don't have time.
Yes.
The last few years we don't have time. We're so busy. I had great time during the COVID season because we stopped working. We spent some time locked down. I had great opportunity to spend 50 days with my kids all day long, which was really a great experience. I have a daughter 20 years old now. She's a student in UK, and I have a son 15 years old. And 2 years ago, but this time we started to have the first lockdown here in Greece, and we were 50 days all together in our house. So we spent together time with the kids. And at that time, I had great opportunity to read some books. But generally, the practice is busy. We operate a lot. I love traveling. I love traveling a lot. I love traveling, visiting places.
What's your favorite destination? What's your favorite destination? I mean,
Cairo,
what's your favorite country?
Cairo, of course. Egypt, of course.
Yeah.
I always love to come to Cairo. I have so many dear friends there, and I like the food and the weather. It's amazing. And everywhere I go, I like, because it's nice to see new places and meet new friends and changing ideas and make some conversations on a political base, on a business base, on a social base, and everything.
Yeah, the culture is very similar in both countries. We have
exactly
some similarities and fun.
4,000 years. 4,000 years.
Yeah.
4,000 years.
Yes. Even more now. They think it's more than 4,000. So let me ask you the last question about the Greek cuisine. It's a very splendid one. Give us any recommendations about your favorite foods? Yeah. I mean, any recommendations you'd like to give us about this, the foods that you like in the Greek cuisine in general?
If you ever come to Greece, I would like to have you as a guest, and I would like to take you out and have nice fish in the fish restaurant, because the fish here from the Aegean Sea is so tasty and so nicely made. So fresh fish, it's the best thing you can eat in Greece.
Fish, okay.
Fish.
That's going to be on my when I come to visit Greece. This will be on my on the top of my list. So now we come to the end of our first part, which is the social part in our episode or interview. Now move to the second part, in which we'll discuss our main topic for this episode, which is about the management of aphakia cases using the Carli Valley lens, which will be given by Dr. Katsaridis. I think this is his favorite technique nowadays after the introduction of this lens in the last 2 years, because we all know that variety of surgical techniques for the management of these cases. All of them are very tedious and require a lot of training and learning curves. So we will see about this technique. Is it an easy one or it's a difficult one to learn? So Dr. Katsaridis, please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share the screen and my presentation. Right. So Carlevale sclerally fixated intraocular lens, to my experience now, I think is the ultimate solution. There are many ways to correct an aphakia, either lens in the anterior chamber or iris claw or Macallan sutures to fixate in the posterior chamber onto the iris. But all of them some complications, such as chronic irritation of the iris, which can lead to cystoid edema or posterior synecdoche. And we, as a retinal specialist, we need to check the periphery of the retina. And in most of these cases, we don't get a good dilated pupil. So the posterior suturing of the lens is as old as the intraocular lenses itself. Malbrand has published his technique to suture the haptics of the lens onto the sclera into the posterior chamber back in 1986. And we were using this technique for more than 20 years, since Gabor Chariot came and he introduced his technique with scleral tunnels without sutures, and he was pushing the haptics of the lens into the tunnels. But a year later, Agrawal made it a little bit easier in order to create tunnels and to push the haptics into the tunnels, which sometimes you can get some breakage of the haptic. He was creating flaps, and into the flaps, next to the flaps, pockets, and he was placing the haptics of the intraocular lens there, and he was using glue to glue the scleral flap. But even though in these techniques we have problems also, such as haptic release, either blockage of the suture, if it is sutured, or slippage of the scleral tunnel, or tilting of the intraocular lens. Now, from the March 2010 up to March 2018, I operated 269 patients using the Agrawal's technique. And I separated my cases in two groups. The first small group, it was 44 cases, where I was using the same dislocated intraocular lens. And what happened is that 10 of the cases, the haptic was loosed again, and I have to reoperate. And in these cases, I took the lens out and placed a new one. 5 of the cases, the haptic was broke, and I have again to reoperate the case and place a new one. In 6 of the cases, I had a terrible tilted lens, which was blocking the pupil, and I had again to reoperate. That means 21 out of 44 cases, almost 50% of the cases, that I had to go to do another operation. Therefore, I decided to change the lens in any case. And you get these complications because the old intraocular lens, being in the capsula for so long, they get stiff haptics. Once you pull the haptics to place them into the sclera, you create a tension onto the haptic in order to make the breakage or the slippage. So it's better to take the old lens out and place a new one. And my favorite lens to place a new one in, it's Alcon's MA60. So the rest 225 new cases that I place a new intraocular lens, I had only 6 cases of retinal detachment and 4 cases haptic loss. That means 10 cases altogether, less than 4% of reoperation. And why I did 6 cases of retinal detachment? Because I didn't have the guts, I didn't dare to make a scleral depression at the end of the operation to check the periphery of the retina because of the fear of slippage of the haptic. Therefore, I missed 6 cases where there were pre-existing or new created retinal breaks. And I come to, in 2015, the new intraocular lens Carlevale came into the market. And I come to this important conclusion. First of all, do not use the same drop intraocular lens. Second, you have to use a new one. And once you have to use a new one, it's better to use the one that is specially made for this reason, which is the Carlevale intraocular lens. So this ingenious idea has, first of all, a big optic, almost 6 millimeters, which sits perfectly behind the pupil and provides a magnificent view to the patient. Second, it has these 2 flaps next to the optic part of the lens that prevents tilting and keeps the lens stable. And finally, these 2 plugs that you externalize it out of the sclera and provide stability to the lens. What you need to have is these 2 specially made Dorx forceps for placing sclerally fixated intraocular lenses. Especially this one, the curved one, gives you better access to the tag, to the plug from the nasal part. And let's go now to the video. Here is a dislocated intraocular lens. This is the new technique that Carlos Carlevale has improved his initially scleral flaps that was covering the plugs. Now we do an incision, and next to incision we create 2 pockets. In these pockets we place the ears of the plug. In this case, the patient has an ERM, so I peel the ERM also. And you see the floating intraocular, dislocated intraocular lens, which I brought it into the anterior chamber. And with the Pacman's technique, I remove it easily. And then we go to the Carlevale. We place it into the cartridge, and we go to the nasal part first. We inject it. We found the plug. We grab it with the forceps, and we pull out the first plug from the nasal part, and then we go to the temporal one. We feed the second forceps with the straight one, and once the plugs are in the place, we put the ears of the plugs into the scleral pockets. And this is how the operation, and now this is the most important thing. You have the ability to make scleral depression around the eye and find old or new retinal breaks in order to prevent retinal detachment after this operation. So, since last year, March, from March 2018, I have operated more than 110 cases. I would add another 50 cases that I made last year, so altogether 160, and 3 of them were children with no major complications, some kind of mild vitreous blood that has been absorbed. Now, this is a 72-year-old lady. You see the sunset of the lens that had before the operation, and you can see how nicely sits the optical part of the Carlevale lens behind the pupil. If no one tells you that this lady has a sclerally fixated intraocular lens, you will difficultly find that this is a Scarlett lens. You see the scleral flaps. Initially, I was made the technique of the first described by Carlevale, the flaps that covering the plugs of the lens. And here another case. This is a 9-year-old boy who had open corneal globe trauma because of a knife, and he had a cataract formation and retinal detachment. So we fixed the cataract and cataract only with no retinal detachment. So initially it was fixed the cataract with aphakia, left aphakic the eye, and then secondary I placed the Carlevale intraocular lens. You see how nicely is placed and how nicely positioned. So this is a big series that we have published here from Greece last year. Big number, more than 200 cases in the European Journal of Ophthalmology. And this is something that I'm really proud of it. 3 kids, the first kids globally that had operated with Carlevale intraocular lens and no complications so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's a very elegant and a very useful technique, I think. So let me ask you some questions about this lens and this technique probably. So what are the type of patients? I mean, the patient selection for these types of vials. Is there any certain inclusion criteria for these patients that you're gonna operate them with these lens? Let me ask you again about the advantages. Let me ask you again about the advantages of this technique when you compare to the Mani technique, for example. What about the learning curve?
The learning curve is very easy for a vitreoretinal surgeon. It's much easier than Yamani technique, for example. Second, there are no limitations. And actually, there are advantages also. I have placed this lens in 3 traumatic aniridias, and believe me that the patient has less photophobia with the Carlevale lens compared to the aphakia situation, without placing an artificial iris pupil. So these flaps that the Carlevale has around the optical part provide some kinds of protection from the light and reduces the photophobia. So far they see very well. They don't have distraction by the light during the day, and they don't feel that they have a need of additional protection from artificial iris. I have operated, as I told you, the youngest patient, which was 1 year old, 1.5, and the oldest recently was 92-year-old lady. So there are no limitations, neither glaucoma, nor other diabetics. Of course, if you have a severe trauma with PVR, you prefer to leave the eye aphakic instead of placing a Carlevale lens. But in a normal eye that has just dislocated intraocular lens or complicated cataract surgery and no capsular support, go for Carlevale.
Yes. Let me ask you something else about the technique itself. How far from the limbus do you go with your forceps? Where do you make your sclerotomy, typically from the limbus? And which gauge of instruments can you make this sclerotomy? Is it a 25 gauge or 23 gauge sclerotomy through which you can go and get the IOL? And how do you catch the leading knob itself before? Before unfolding of the IOL, you can miss it, for example, and you cannot catch the sclera plug or the knob where you can extract the IOL. So can you tell us about these questions? Yes.
First of all, I use always 25 gauge instruments, and the opening where I externalize the plug, I do it with 20 gauge needle. I prefer to have a large opening in order not to damage the plug pulling it out. It happens sometimes for smaller size. When you try to externalize it, you might break it because you stress it into a small hole. It's better to be a large hole, 20 gauge, pull it out, and then place the two ears of the plug into the pockets. Now, the distance from the limbus, it's about 2.5 to 3 millimeters. So behind the ciliary body, but in front of the ora serrata, in order not to damage the retina. And the way to grab the first plug while you inject it in, you inject the lens and you hold it while the half part of the lens is into the pupillar area. At that time, you are able to identify where the plug is to grab it and pull it out. And once you grab it, then you continue to push the cartridge, the injection, to take all the intraocular lens out and take the plug outside of the sclera and leave the rest of the lens between the pupil and into the front, in front of the iris. It's better. Sometimes slips into the vitreous cavity, and then you have to use the light pipe and the pair of forceps to take the plug from the vitreous cavity, which is not difficult, but it's an excessive step that you cannot, you can avoid it while you have the lens into the anterior chamber.
So you grasp the lens before completely unfolding the optic, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And you take any sutures for these 20 gauge sclerotomies at the end of the surgery?
I don't do any suture, just cover it with the conjunctiva and suture the conjunctiva. What I do to prevent hypotony the first couple of days is to fill the anterior chamber with viscoelastic. Because I have the 3 openings of the vitrectomy. I have the 2 additional openings for the plugs, and I have the cornea wood and the side port. So a lot of leakage. And sometimes if you don't suture it, you might get that much hypotony where you create choroidal effusion. Therefore, I fill the anterior chamber with Hilon, with viscoelastic. I prefer the eye to go up to 25 or 30 millimeters of mercury the first day and the second day, rather than be around 5 or 2. You can better manage the high pressure, but it's difficult to manage the low pressure in a post-op case. And normally they sit between 10 and 15. When you fill the anterior chamber with viscoelastic, the first day you go and check the pressure and you find around the 15, which is ideal. Very rare you have high pressures over 20 or 25. This is a very good tip that you have to use it once you try this technique.
Yes, perfect. So probably this has become your favorite technique in managing all these cases nowadays?
Yes. Any aphakia, it's Carle-Vallee lens.
I think it's a very brilliant technique, and I think it's easier than the Mani technique, maybe.
Much easier, much safer.
I think so. It could be, yes. So probably we have all to try this technique here in Egypt, and until we have this lens available. And now we came to the end of our interview with you for this episode, and I'd like to thank you so much for giving us your time and for sharing your personal thoughts and insights and introducing us with this perfect technique. And we hope that this technique will be spread more. Many surgeons will use it. I mean, with the short learning curve, I think it would be a good option in management of these challenging cases. I'd like to also to thank our audience for staying with us and for watching us. And I hope that they will stay tuned with us for upcoming episodes again with Around the Retina World in 30 Days. Have a good night. Thank you so much.